Imam Doctor Omar Suleiman, a Palestinian-American, Muslim scholar, civil rights leader, and president of the Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research, discusses the ongoing crisis in Gaza and Palestine in a podcast. He emphasizes the need to understand the root causes of the violence and the occupation, and challenges the ignorance and apathy surrounding the Palestinian plight. Suleiman highlights the dire situation in Gaza, where the people live under constant threat of bombings and face daily transgressions due to the occupation. He points out the disproportionate casualties and the daily humiliation of living under occupation, which is often ignored by the mainstream media. He stresses the need to look beyond the headlines and understand the ongoing suffering of the Palestinian people. The impact of the violence and occupation on the people of Gaza is profound. The population lives in an open-air prison with limited opportunities for education and economic advancement. The constant threat of bombings and the trauma of living under occupation have led to a sense of hopelessness and frustration among the Palestinian population. The destruction of schools, universities, and cultural sites has further exacerbated the situation, leaving the people of Gaza in a state of despair. Suleiman criticizes the mainstream media for its biased coverage of the Palestinian plight, particularly in the context of the recent violence in Gaza. He highlights the need for a more balanced and comprehensive understanding of the situation, beyond the selective coverage that often focuses on Israeli casualties while ignoring the ongoing suffering of the Palestinian people. He also calls for accountability and action from the international community to address the root causes of the crisis. Suleiman shares the story of Wael al-Duq, a Palestinian journalist and bureau chief of Al Jazeera in Gaza City. Wael has experienced the worst of the occupation, including imprisonment, airstrikes, and the loss of his family members. Despite facing unimaginable tragedy, Wael continues to report on the lives of the people of Gaza with dignity and compassion. His resilience and determination to tell the story of Gaza exemplify the strength and courage of the Palestinian people in the face of adversity. Suleiman emphasizes the importance of justice and self-determination for the Palestinian people. He challenges the notion that acts of kindness or benevolence from the occupying power can address the underlying injustice of the occupation and apartheid. He calls for an end to the occupation and apartheid, and for the international community to support the Palestinian people's right to pursue their own dignity and freedom. Suleiman discusses the concept of resistance to occupation and apartheid, emphasizing that it is morally justified and supported by international law. He acknowledges the complexities of resistance and the need to distinguish between justified resistance and transgressions. He also challenges the narrative that Palestinians should find better ways to resist, pointing out the systemic repression and violence they face regardless of their methods of resistance. Suleiman describes the impact of the conflict on the Muslim community in America, drawing parallels to the post-9/11 era. He shares the story of a 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy who was stabbed to death in a hate crime, highlighting the dehumanization and bigotry faced by Muslims in the country. He expresses frustration at the lack of attention and empathy for Palestinian lives, particularly in comparison to other acts of violence. Suleiman criticizes U.S. politicians for their role in the conflict, accusing them of being complicit in the ongoing violence. He argues that the U.S. has failed to act as an honest peace broker and has instead supported Israel's actions. He calls for a reevaluation of U.S. foreign policy and a cessation of funding for Israel's military operations. He also criticizes President Joe Biden for his handling of the conflict, citing his lack of empathy and failure to address Palestinian humanity. Suleiman emphasizes the need for change and accountability in U.S. politics, particularly in relation to the conflict in Palestine. He calls for a shift in societal sentiment and a rejection of the current political status quo. He highlights the lack of media coverage of pro-Palestine demonstrations and the diverse, multi-faith support for the Palestinian cause. He also discusses the generational gap in opinion and the growing awareness of the situation in Palestine among younger demographics. Suleiman acknowledges the presence of protests against Israel on college campuses, noting that they often face opposition from individuals with contrary messaging. He highlights the importance of maintaining consistent messaging and the challenges posed by individuals who disrupt the protests. The guest emphasizes the need to listen to the voices of those demonstrating for justice and freedom, rather than focusing on isolated incidents at protests. He also points out the diverse presence of Jewish anti-occupation groups at pro-Palestine marches, challenging the notion that the sentiment is anti-Semitic. Suleiman criticizes the framing of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, highlighting the occupation and dehumanization of Palestinians. He discusses the rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hate in the U.S., emphasizing the need to condemn all forms of bigotry. He discusses the role of Benjamin Netanyahu in perpetuating the erasure of Palestinian people and the ongoing occupation. He criticizes the framing of Israel's right to defend its borders, emphasizing the responsibility to protect those under occupation. Suleiman addresses the issue of Palestinian child prisoners and the lack of repercussions for Israel's detention of children. He also discusses the impact of the Abraham Accords and the need for peace agreements to include Palestine. The guest highlights the importance of understanding resistance through the eyes of the oppressed, emphasizing the asymmetry in violence and moral reasoning. He challenges the notion that the majority of Palestinians support the October 7th attacks, emphasizing the trauma and resilience of the Palestinian people. Suleiman emphasizes the importance of the Al-Aqsa Mosque as a holy site for Muslims, Christians, and Jews. He describes it as a place of deep significance where prophets have walked and worshipped, and where the Prophet Muhammad led other prophets in prayer. The mosque holds a special place in the hearts of the Palestinian people, and its sanctity is deeply intertwined with the ongoing crisis in Palestine. Suleiman discusses the rise of Islamophobia and the impact it has on the Muslim community, both in the United States and globally. He emphasizes the importance of interfaith conversations and connections, particularly in the context of the ongoing crisis in Palestine. He calls for greater solidarity and understanding between different faith communities and highlights the need for moral consistency in addressing issues of injustice and oppression. Looking ahead, Suleiman expresses hope for a future where nations and people can transcend barriers and divisions and work towards a more unified and compassionate world. He emphasizes the need to see people as people rather than threats or enemies, and calls for a shift towards a more inclusive and interconnected global community. Throughout the conversation, Suleiman draws inspiration from the resilience of the Palestinian people and the examples of strength and determination that they embody. He emphasizes the role of faith in providing strength and hope, and highlights the importance of maintaining optimism and a sense of purpose in the face of adversity.